A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back to video games that are totally awesome. So of course, while I have talked about this one just as well as I did with Arkham Asylum in HD and Super Graphics, it's probably worth talking about again because Batman Arkham City was, no doubt, a great follow-up to the last game. It not only introduced us the idea of more antagonist characters to fight against, but it also gave Batman a bit of a more isolated region in which to fight upon. An entire city's worth of criminal activity. A heavily guarded, isolated area, that of which is made specifically as a means for criminals to dwell within. And whether certain actions are made and damage is made, or deaths or injuries are made, doesn't entirely matter all that much because apparently Gotham needed some sort of barrier between them and the world of criminal organizations held within. But to be fair, it almost did seem like it would be a necessary step to allowing for Gotham to supposedly recuperate from the many years of criminal losses. But while Bruce Wayne has had his own beliefs on the matter, a bunch of mysterious armed guards come along and knock him out cold, and then he's basically brought in to a guy named Hugo Strange. Yeah. Hugo Strange, of course, is a rather infamous fellow, a psychiatrist, whom is also apparently responsible for overseeing a certain operation that is unfolding. The guardsmen that hit Bruce Wayne and took him in were known as Tiger Guards. Yeah. This militia-like organization is basically working alongside Hugo Strange as a means of enacting a certain thing called Protocol 10. Yeah. And it does invoke a slight fear to most gamers. Because who knows what Protocol 10 really is? Not even Hugo himself is hoping to tell Bruce Wayne, or Batman even for that matter. And yeah, we definitely ought to mention that if it was one thing that Bane somehow figured out the identity of Batman, how about Hugo Strange? He somehow figured the same thing as well. And on top of all that, this belief that Protocol 10 will make Hugo Strange famous? I mean, that's really something to look forward to, right? Batman, of course, is able to break free from his shackles and eventually climb his way up to the Ace Chemical rooftop where he's able to obtain his bat suit and settle into action. The first thing he does, of course, is to rescue the one and only Catwoman, whom we saw in the very opening scene of the game, of which that Catwoman had broken into a safe and stole some sort of GPS tracking chip. Two-Face, of course, took her into the old courthouse, where Batman now has to rescue her. And Two-Face, as we know, is a man who tends to flip a coin. One side shows his good side, and the other shows his bad side. Of course, the good side shows him first, and allows for a fair trial to commence at the courthouse. Of course, the main sentencing for Catwoman, should she be deemed guilty by Two-Face or otherwise, is being dropped into some pot of acid. Quite threatening, wouldn't you say? Of course, when Batman does deal with all this stuff and Catwoman eventually breaks herself free, the two do have a bit of a talking to before a shot is fired into the courtroom. Apparently, it came from the top floor of the steeple of the church. Batman makes his way over there and eventually discovers that Joker's behind this mysterious assassination attempt. Yeah. The Joker himself went so far as to claim that there was an asylum, some monsters, and Batman left him to die. Yeah. So, we definitely have ourselves a bit of a conundrum on our hands. Because not only are we trying to deal with figuring out what in the world Hugo Strange is trying to do here, but it also does seem that Joker has some kind of ulterior motive of being in Arkham City just the same. Yeah. But what happens eventually is that we are made to make our way over to the steel mill in which that Joker himself has taken full control over. There, of course, is Harley Quinn and a majority of Joker's own crew members, guarding the place with their life, pretty much. I might as well mention that there are a number of different elements introduced in this game. The last one, of course, had a number of different melee attacks, guns, weapons of all sorts, Titan-enhanced inmates and whatnot, but Arkham City does things a bit differently. We do have much of the same sort of stuff to expect, but there's also the introduction of blades, in which that you can thankfully dodge by doing a specific set of commands. There's also shields, as well as armored thugs that you have to deal with in specific combo attacks as well. Specific stuns and careful blows can ensure that they are defeated just as easily as the others. There also are a good amount of guns that the thugs can get a hold of, and Titan-enhanced inmates, believe it or not, you can not only defeat them, but you can also take control of them and deal additional damage to other enemies around you. You can get them to charge, perform a shockwave, slap them around. You know, you actually have some commands that you can make towards the Titan-enhanced inmates just as well. Of course, Batman does unfortunately make it up to where the Joker is, but finds out that he's dead. Harley blames him for it, of course, but it turns out that it was just a trick. The Joker basically gasses him. Harley knocks him out with her baseball bat, and Batman is basically just unconscious for the time being. So what we get until then is basically a little playthrough with Catwoman. She intends to, in fact, rob Hugo Strange. Yeah. And where does she go to find help? Well, she goes to Poison Ivy. Yeah. And meanwhile, while Catwoman is trying to work things out with Poison Ivy, Batman comes to, and eventually we get to see what happened. Turns out he's being laced with part of the Joker's own blood. And worse is that samples of Joker's blood has been shipped to areas all over the city. Gotham itself, for the most part, is in danger. These blood samples are, in fact, going to be rather deadly. Batman believed that that was Protocol 10 the whole time for Hugo Strange to work with the Joker and have his blood samples shipped to eradicate the city. Yeah. But even Joker has no knowledge of what Protocol 10 even is, so this is yet another thing for Batman to wonder. Of course, Batman has to go find good old Mr. Freeze in order to work on the antidote to stop this infection from potentially killing him. So Batman goes over to the old GCPD station, and then, well, we find out that he's not there. Mr. Freeze apparently has been moved over to the museum, which is known as the Penguin's own turf. Of course, the Penguin tries to trap Batman inside, but thanks to some municipal codes for the structure itself, Batman is able to unlock his way out. And then makes his way over to the museum. He finds out the place is jammed, and looks and finds some jammers all over the area. Destroys each jammer by going up top and then underground. Then eventually makes his way back to the museum, where he's given a pretty big greeting by the Penguin as well as his crew. Of course, there's a variety of different GCPD cops that are inside the museum as well for Batman to rescue. And while he is unfortunately able to, well, save any of them for the most part, because at least a couple end up dead. But later on in the game, we do get to find more of them, and the remaining cops that are still around are thankfully rescued quickly. By exploring the many areas of the building itself, especially with the main segment being covered in ice and water, as well as a ferocious shark named Tiny, we are able to navigate over to the many segments of this museum itself. We get to a segment where we find Mr. Freeze himself in a hot area, a segment where one of the two Abramovici brothers are, with Sickle being the one that we fight in the museum, while Abramovici himself, known as Hammer, is basically whom we fought back at the steel mill. These guys will basically make more appearances throughout the game, so consider them more consistent characters throughout the whole storyline at this very point. But once we get all of that stuff done, Mr. Freeze has a special jamming device that's located in his own suit. Once we get through all of that and take on the Penguin himself, we're able to jam the freeze gun and take him down. But Penguin has a different plan. He blows up the structure, sending Batman to the basement, where he finds none other than Solomon Grundy, the guy who was born on a Monday, christened on a Tuesday, married on a Wednesday, so on and so forth. And he is down there waiting for Batman and ready to take him out. Pronto. This leads to a pretty epic boss battle that we have here with some killer music and quite a unique character performance by actor Fred Tatasciore. This guy is known in the world of voice acting quite well, actually. And much like with the last Batman Arkham game, we do have some great voice performances by the likes of Kevin Conroy, Nolan North, Mark Hamill, Tara Strong, etc. We do have lots of great actors here that we've remembered over the years, and they're all in this one game, wouldn't you know? Even Corey Burton and Maurice LaMarche are in this game. Who wouldn't you know? When Solomon is defeated, Penguin's eventually defeated. Freeze takes back the museum to himself and would eventually make his way back to the GCPD building to continue his research. He explains to Batman, however, that they need a special enzyme bonded to human DNA, essentially like a blood sample. Batman tells him he knows of someone that could probably help, Ra's al Ghul, the demon himself, the main founder of the League of Assassins. A man that is potentially deadlier than most others so far. And then, of course, upon saying this, you know what happens? A member of the League of Assassins actually becomes a trail for Batman to follow. By looking at her blood sampling from a cut that she had gotten after breaking out of her cell, she unfortunately is able to be tracked, as Batman would place a device on her back. And once he makes his way down there, well, he is greeted not only by the members of the League of Assassins themselves, but also Talia al Ghul, Ra's own daughter, whom apparently used to have a thing with Batman. So, yeah. I mean, it's not just the fact that we're dealing with one character here, with Catwoman, for instance, but now Talia? Wow. Talk about impressive. Anyways, though, she initiates a series of tests for Batman to follow. That way, he can potentially become the successor to Ra's al Ghul, to take over the League of Assassins for him, as he is more than willing to pass on. Of course, while Batman is able to complete all these tests successfully, he doesn't want to do the last thing. To kill Ra's al Ghul and take over. The main reason he wanted to go there in the first place was to get a sample of his blood. That was the reason why he went there in the first place. We have yet another boss battle here. Ra's al Ghul falls into his own pit of Lazarus again, setting himself up for perfect, youthful, combative measures. And it certainly is a unique fight like the last one. I mean, we're not only projected into some make-believe world that Ra's had created after all these years of living, but it sure is an excellent reminder that this sort of addiction to a certain formula that helps remove any and all aging and puts Ra's in a youthful state all over again truly is a means to deliver potentially the worst in him. Prolonged exposure did in fact drive him over the edge. And even though Batman was able to take a bit of the Lazarus itself as a means to replenish his overall health and help prevent him from potentially succumbing to the infection he's gotten from Joker, the thing is, Batman thankfully is around for a little while longer and is able to just stay around long enough so that way he can get the blood sample to Mr. Freeze and work on the cure. Unfortunately, even though he does so, Mr. Freeze turns against Batman, fights against him, and this one's another unique boss battle that, unlike most of the others, has to be done in a different way. You gotta surprise Mr. Freeze because his telemetric capabilities are insane. The fact that he's able to detect Batman no matter what's going on means you really got to play up your tactical skills. You got to surprise him in many ways. You got to go from the vents. You got to put explosive gel against him. You got to perform a hang and takedown on him and whatnot. There's several different methods that you can utilize, each of which will allow for you to take him down easily. Though he will have to be taken down in 4 segments. So 4 different one of these tactics. You can't repeat the same ones twice, as he will basically figure it out and find a way to prevent it. So that's the thing about adaptation. And the fact is that most of us tend to learn from our own battles and figure out the skills that the opponents are using. And that's sort of what Freeze is doing here. It's an ingenious idea in the faces of combat. Imagine having to, let's say, switch your game up and play a different tactical role because the enemy has figured out what you're planning to do to strike them. And it's like in real life too. If somebody finds out that you're trying to take them down in a specific way, they'll eventually get used to it and try to counter it or block it off so you can't pull it off anymore. That's why you gotta switch up your fighting style every now and then. But when Batman does defeat Mr. Freeze and unlock the safe to retrieve the cure that he stowed away in there, it's unfortunately gone. He has to go back to the steel mill as Joker had stolen it from him. But he also does make a promise to Mr. Freeze to find his missing wife, Nora. And while this is considered a side quest amongst a few other different things, including another interaction with the Riddler, much like in the last game, even though the riddles in this one are way more broader, way more complex, and sometimes way more challenging. Quite a way to do things, wouldn't you know? Of course, there's also other side quests that you get to do here. A series of augmented reality trainings which will allow for you to get a special grappling hook upgrade and allow for you to get a nice little boost. So that way, you can get to where you need a lot faster. This especially becomes important when you're, wouldn't you know, playing against Victor Zsasz. Yeah, a series of telephone calls he makes, a little game that he plays with Batman, and this is where the grappling boost does come in handy the most, I will say. There's also the many political prisoners that are being assaulted by various inmates of Arkham City, and speaking of political prisoners, there's also Deadshot. He basically assassinates these guys, and it's up to Batman to find out where he is and put a stop to him. So, of course, this is just to name a few of the different side quests that are also available in the game, which can give you a lot more bang for your buck. Which, compared to Arkham Asylum, there weren't really much in terms of side quests, other than all the riddles that you could solve, and potentially make full completion of the game from there. But with Arkham City, you have much more to do, and therefore, much more time you'd likely need to spend for full-on completion of the game. So anyways, Batman gets over to the steel mill once again, has a little showdown with the Joker as a means to retrieve the cure that was stolen. Obviously, we know that the Joker is probably going to need the cure just as much as the Batman himself is going to need it, but Batman unfortunately ends up getting crushed by rubble. Yeah. And while he is alive, thankfully, Talia shows up. Again. I mean, it's true that Batman didn't really do anything for her at that point. I mean, he practically lied to her about wanting to join the League of Assassins and take over and stuff by not taking out her father, but really, Batman had another purpose for wanting to be there in the first place. But of course, Talia did say to him to follow his heart. This is where we once again cut back to Catwoman, who thankfully does make an agreement with Ivy. She's able to break into Hugo's vault while Catwoman infiltrates it and retrieves a few security cards. Thankfully not getting caught in the process. She's able to get into the vault, steal 2 briefcases full of loot, as well as find the last plant in Arkham City, in which that it's optional, but you can pick it up to destroy it. Yeah. I almost would have wondered though, why doesn't this exactly affect anything in the game? Like, is there no need for it or whatnot? Oh, but here comes a real special part here. After she grabs a hold of the 2 briefcases, she has, get this, 2 choices to make. She finds out that Batman is at the steel mill under some rubble. However, she looks to the right and notices the way out to Gotham City. Yeah, she can leave Arkham and go to Gotham with her loot. Or she could go and rescue Batman. Obviously, when she leaves Arkham, it leads to some pretty depressing end credits. A voice of distress from Barbara Gordon reveals that Batman's dead, everybody she knows is dead, and she's one of the only ones alive that is able to broadcast the message. Joker is somehow unstoppable. And it's likely because Talia did reveal to him a supposed secret of immortality. I bet you we could probably guess what that is, right? Yeah, even Raish had told us about it earlier in the game. Or, of course, by heading to Batman, you know what we get to do? We not only get to save his life, but he gets to stop the one and only Protocol 10, which is in full effect by the time that Catwoman had gotten out of the vault. So, after all this time that had happened, it's a miracle that anyone would be alive at all. Because the thing is, Protocol 10 was apparently some sort of execution for all the inmates in Arkham City. And Batman is able to grapple hold of the helicopters as a means to avoid their gunfire. And he's also able to grab a hold of a special set of codes to help decrypt his way through to Wonder Tower, which is basically the current spot of good old Hugo Strange himself. And the professor is all the way up at the top floor of the tower itself. So, Batman has to trek his way up there, and supposedly this idea of Protocol 10 has allowed for a good 22% of fatalities, and the plans do state, according to Strange himself, that by the end of the month, there will be new camps put against the likes of Keystone and Metropolis, and as a staple made specifically to allow Protocol 10 to become the biggest phenomenon in history. So you could really say that this supposed execution plan for hundreds, even thousands of people in an isolated segment of Gotham, named after the very island that unfortunately flopped because of the Joker? I mean, was executing everybody in Arkham really supposed to be the solution to everybody's problem? Because think about it, on top of all the stuff that's going on there, Hugo actually planned on doing more than just simply going through all of Arkham. I mean, Metropolis, Keystone, and whatnot, these are entire cities which practically aren't exactly like how Gotham is put together. Oh, but trust me, once you do get to Hugo Strange himself, it gets even more crazy. Once you defeat him and shut the place down with Oracle's help, Raish comes in. He stabs the crap out of Strange and enters the room, explaining to Batman that what they're seeing outside is a glorious day. Apparently, this whole thing along was Raish's plan, not Strange. It was all Raish's idea the whole time. And the thing is that it was one thing for him to try to get Batman to join the League of Assassins, let alone take over for him. But this plan that is all set in motion as a result of Hugo Strange's failures, obviously he was going to ditch his own puppet. Yeah. Oh, but it gets even worse here. Hugo Strange obviously had a different plan here the whole time. He had another protocol in mind, Protocol 11, to self-destruct the tower. And Batman and Raish were now inside with him. They're able to jump out, though, safely, and Raish stabs himself before landing on a spike. I don't get why that would ever need to happen. Yeah, pretty anticlimactic. This whole thing was Raish's idea, and he just straight up kills himself. Very clever right there. But at least he's out of the way for good this time, because Batman can now focus on Joker and Talia. And well, when that does happen, he basically goes over to the good old Monarch Theater to ask for the cure. Joker demands the cure from him, even though he's already gotten hold of it. Talia goes in around and stabs Joker. Oh man. Yet another point of anticlimactic endings. But, oh, it's not over, apparently. Because Talia gets shot. And apparently, there's two Jokers here. If it hadn't already become clear, there was apparently a sick Joker and a well Joker in the entirety of this game. But this is the point where it actually becomes quite clear. Turns out that this other Joker, whom is well, is actually Clayface. And the sick Joker with the gun is basically the real Joker the whole time. So Clayface has a hold of the cure as well as the blade of Talia. Batman, of course, has to face off against him with an invention that Mr. Freeze had given to him, known as the Freeze Grenade. And the Freeze Grenade actually does work rather effectively against Clayface in many ways. There's also bombs riddled against the corner of the theater that Batman can use to his advantage. After enough health is taken down, Joker ends up blowing up the floor, where Batman is able to eventually retrieve the sword and finish off Clayface. By slicing them together and using more freeze grenades, he's able to defeat Clayface for good this time. Freezing him up and slicing him down. I don't know exactly what more could you want out of that. But then, of course, Joker has himself a plan for immortality. Batman, however, is able to practically destroy the entirety of the Lazarus Pit by sticking his sword up into the machine. It is able to push Clayface inside, blowing the place up. But then, of course, while Batman is able to use the cure on himself, there's still a bit left. The Joker practically pleads for him to give it to him, even stabbing him in the shoulder, causing him to drop the cure, destroying the vial, and practically making it meaningless. This means that Joker is now doomed, just as Mr. Freeze had predicted all along. But at least there was a certain doctor that we saw earlier, where she told Batman that Joker was going on about his last laugh. And Batman practically gave it to him by telling him, even after everything he's done, Batman could have saved him. But apparently, dropping the cure meant it was all over. The Joker is now dead. And just like that, we have basically what is a reenactment of the painting from the very opening scene of the game, where the Joker's body is being carried outside of Arkham by Batman himself, and everybody is basically watching as the Joker has now fallen for good. It's quite a sad, yet inevitable ending to a rather long-running franchise. And just as we know here, it's all over. The end credits do play, however, with a certain song that Joker has pre-made as a special message that he left for Batman. That's pretty much Batman Arkham City in a nutshell here. Even after the game, though, there is still one major mission, though, that you can complete as Catwoman, where you can pick up the rest of your loot from Two-Face, as well as most of his criminal thugs as well. But for the most part, even after completing all of this stuff and a lot of the other things, you still do have a bit of a ways to go, depending on how much progress you made with the other stuff. So, there you pretty much go. I just reviewed Batman Arkham City again. Even though Return to Arkham had remastered the likes of Arkham City, I will say that having played Arkham City since practically the very beginning of it all was certainly an amazing thing. A great follow-up to the last game here. And while we will say that in 2013 when they did Arkham Origins, as well as with 2015's Arkham Knight, there were, of course, a number of things to talk about here and there, but in the end, it's a great franchise that we've had. I'll talk about the other sequels here, and for Arkham City, I'll give it about the same scoring as the last one, a 9.1. So I'll see you guys tomorrow with Arkham Origins.